Macbeth, Act III, Scene 6. This short scene brings the third act of the play to its conclusion, and it revolves around the conversation between two lords, Lennox and an unnamed lord, and really Shakespeare puts it in the play firstly to summarise what's happened in the play so far, because you'll notice that some of the things that these two characters say are just giving us a reminder of the things that have taken place in the action of the play so far. And it also serves as a verbal communication of the tyranny of Macbeth's rule, because Shakespeare presents Macbeth very much as a tyrannical ruler. He is cruel and he is violent. What we don't see on stage is the way in which his reign affects the people in Scotland. And it's only through what the other characters say that we really get a sense of just how awful Macbeth is as a king and how he treats his people. Those who he's supposed to be serving as king, remember, it's his job to serve. But he very much takes the reins of power and abuses that power. So you'll notice that in some of the discussion that takes place. Now, understand that this first quite long speech from Lennox is designed to be delivered in quite a sarcastic manner, in quite a sarcastic tone. Just to set the scene for you, in this conversation between these two lords, Lennox, remember, in the earlier part of the play, has been completely loyal to Macbeth. But now he, like Banquo before him, the late departed Banquo of course, and Macduff, now has deep suspicions about Macbeth and no longer trusts him. Lennox was the lord who in Act 3 Scene 4, that disastrous banqueting scene, was the one who said good night and better health attend his majesty. Now, I said at the time that that line is meant to be delivered in such a way that you can already see at that point that Lennox no longer has confidence in Macbeth as his king, and by the time we get to Scene 6, he really has turned against him. And this long speech that begins this scene, well, longish speech, I suppose, which begins this scene, is meant to be delivered in quite a sarcastic manner. So let's have a look at what he says. My former speeches have but hit your thoughts which can interpret farther. Only I say, things have been strangely born. As is so often the case, and I've mentioned this in previous tutorials, Shakespeare uses this dramatic device whereby we, the audience, come in not quite halfway through a conversation, but after the conversation between the two characters has already started. What Lennox is saying in his opening lines here is that what I have been saying to you is clearly similar to what you are thinking. So in other words, we're meant to understand that this other unnamed lord has been voicing his suspicions about Macbeth and also voicing his disapproval at the terrible way in which Macbeth is running the country. And Lennox is saying, yeah, I think the same way that you do, and some of the things that I've been saying to you clearly go along with your way of thinking as well. When he describes things have been strangely born, what he's saying here is that the things that have been happening in Scotland, leading up to Duncan's murder and after Duncan's murder in particular, they've been very, very strange. It's Shakespeare's way of creating this idea that the country of Scotland, under Macbeth, has been plunged into strange and chaotic times. Remember, I've said before that we need to view Act 3 as the chaos phase of the play. Lennox goes on. The gracious Duncan was pitied of Macbeth. Marry, he was dead. And the right valiant Banquo walked too late, whom, if you may say, if it please you, Fleance killed, for Fleance fled. Men must not walk too late. Now, what's this about? Lennox is not being sarcastic when he describes Banquo as right valiant. Remember, we are always meant to see Banquo as an honest character who, even after death, has the respect of those that he's fought alongside and worked with. And Lennox is being genuine here when he describes Banquo as right valiant. I just want to raise two issues here. Firstly, it's Shakespeare's use of language. When he describes, or rather when he has Lennox describing Banquo walked too late, and then giving the advice, men must not walk too late. Late can have a number of different applications depending on the context. One meaning doesn't turn up on time. The other, if you were to say the late and then give the name of the person. Let's think of an example. Well, William Shakespeare. If I were to say to you the late William Shakespeare, I would mean the dead William Shakespeare. If you refer to somebody who is no longer with us as late, it's reminding us of the fact that they are dead. And of course, by this point in the play, Banquo is dead. So there's a little bit of wordplay going on here. On the one hand, Banquo walked too late, because remember, Banquo was killed at night time when it was already getting late in the day. And of course, that's another application when we talk about the later part of the day to come after. We also have the fact that he walked in the darkness and is now dead, hence the late Banquo. Also, I just draw your attention to this line here. When Lennox says men must not walk too late, that is somewhat ironic and sarcastic, because what it is suggesting is that under Macbeth's reign, it isn't safe for anybody to be out after dark. It's a little hint to suggest that Macbeth has his agents roaming the country, ready to kill anybody who might be heard speaking against Macbeth or breaking the laws that Macbeth has set down. This is one of those lines I was referring to at the beginning of this tutorial. We don't see most of Macbeth's tyranny, but we hear about it. And that's one of the lines in this scene that tells us just what an awful place Scotland has become, what a dangerous place Scotland has become under Macbeth. Men must not walk too late. Also, and bear in mind that Lennox doesn't believe this is part of the sarcasm. When he's talking about Banquo having been killed, he says, "Whom you may say if it please you Fleance killed, for Fleance fled." Clearly, Macbeth has put about that Banquo must have been killed by his son Fleance because Fleance ran away. Remember, it's the same sort of suspicion that Macbeth put on to Malcolm and Donalbain. Because they fled from Scotland to keep themselves safe after Duncan was killed, Macbeth started to put it about. The official version was that they'd run away because they were guilty. Clearly, he's been playing the same trick again, but this time with Fleance, trying to convince people that Fleance must have killed his own father. Lennox goes on. "Who cannot want the thought how monstrous it was for Malcolm and for Donalbain to kill their gracious father? Damned fact." Now there he is being ironic. He does not really believe that it is a damned fact that Malcolm and Donalbain killed their father. He knows that that is not the case. So this is where he is speaking ironically. Nobody, or at the very least Lennox and a number of the other lords, do not believe this version of events that Malcolm and Donalbain had anything to do with the killing of their father. This next line is laden with irony. "How it did grieve Macbeth! Did he not straight in pious rage the two delinquents tear that were the slaves of drink and thralls of sleep?" Remember, going back to Act 3, Scene 3, it was Macbeth's act of killing the guards that raised Macduff's suspicions that Macbeth might have been trying to hide something. Lennox is pretty much thinking along the same lines as Macduff here. how it did grieve Macbeth. Oh, didn't it upset Macbeth? When Duncan was killed, he was so upset that in a pious, meaning a holy rage, the two delinquents, the two guards, he killed, that were the slaves of drink and thralls of sleep. Wasn't it really, really good of Macbeth to kill these two poor drunken guards who were supposed to have killed Duncan? In fact, the irony continues, was not that nobly done? Lennox doesn't really think that what Macbeth did was a noble thing. He's being sarcastic. However, this next point, though said ironically, shows Lennox to be incredibly perceptive. Aye, and wisely too, for 'twould have angered any heart alive to hear the men deny it. So, in a way, he's saying that, yes, it was wise for Macbeth to kill the two guards, because wouldn't it have been awful, wouldn't it have been terrible if those two guards had actually been able to tell the truth? Of course, it would have been terrible, but it would have been terrible for Macbeth. So Lennox is, through the irony of his speech and through what he's saying, is voicing his deep suspicions about Macbeth and also some of the actions that Macbeth has performed, namely the killing of those two guards. So that, I say, has borne all things well. He doesn't really mean that. And I do think that, had he Duncan's sons under his key, as, and please heaven he shall not, they should find what 'twere to kill a father. So should Fleance. In that speech, he is subtly voicing his support for Malcolm and Donalbain. He hopes that Macbeth will never capture them and will never be able to lock them up and have them under his key. In other words, imprisoned by him. He hopes that Malcolm and Donalbain will remain free while Macbeth is on the throne. And of course, if they're free, they're also safe from harm. He carries on. But peace. For from broad words, and 'cause he failed his presence at the tyrant's feast, I hear Macduff lives in disgrace. Sir, can you tell where he bestows himself? So we're being given a reminder here of the fact that Macduff did not turn up for Macbeth's celebratory feast, and he's asking the Lord, where has Macduff gone? And the Lord, who speaks for the first time, says, "The son of Duncan, from whom this tyrant holds the due of birth, lives in the English court, and is received of the most pious Edward with such grace that the malevolence of fortune nothing takes from his high respect. Thither Macduff is gone to pray the holy king upon his aid to wake Northumberland and warlike Seward, that by the help of these, with him above to ratify the work, we may again give to our tables meat, sleep to our nights, free from our feasts and banquets bloody knives, do faithful homage and receive free honours, all which we pine for now. And this report hath so exasperate the king that he prepares for some attempt of war." So what's going on in this speech? Because quite a few important things, plot points in particular, are revealed here. Remember that Lennox has asked, where is Macduff? He lives in disgrace now because Macbeth has turned against him, because Macduff refused to attend his feast. So where's he gone? Now the Lord doesn't answer the question directly. He gets to it, but he doesn't answer the question directly, because the first thing that the Lord reveals is about Malcolm, the son of Duncan. And I want you to notice that the Lord refers to Macbeth as this tyrant, and that Macbeth, this tyrant, holds the due of birth from the son of Duncan. Remember, Malcolm is the rightful heir to the throne, because Macbeth named him as the Prince of Cumberland. And so, therefore, Macbeth has usurped the throne, taken what is not rightly his. And the Lord pulls no punches here when he describes Macbeth as a tyrant. So the son of Duncan, Malcolm, lives in the English court. Now, we know that Malcolm had fled to England, but what Shakespeare does here through this character of the Lord is he gives specific information that Malcolm isn't just hiding out in England. Malcolm has gone to England and gone straight to the court of the English king. And he's not just sat there doing nothing, he's actually formulating a plan in order to take Scotland back. The English king at the time that Macbeth is set, we are told, is the most pious Edward. Now remember, pious means holy. So the king that the Lord is referring to is Edward the Confessor. You may well have heard of him. Edward the Confessor is now Saint Edward because he was canonised. So what Shakespeare's doing here, and this becomes more apparent in Act 4, Scene 2, is he has Malcolm, who is one of our good characters on the side of good. He's in the English court being looked after by a king who would later become a saint. And so Shakespeare is making this very clear distinction between the forces of good, represented by Malcolm, and the forces of evil, represented by Macbeth. So pious Edward, King Edward the Confessor, is looking after Malcolm and taking care of him. And it's at this point that the Lord actually gets round to answering Lennox's question. Thither Macduff is gone to pray the Holy King upon his aid to wake Northumberland and warlike Seward. Let me help you with that bit. Macduff has gone to find Malcolm, and he too has made his way to the court of Edward the Confessor. Again, he's not doing this just to find sanctuary and shelter and safety. What Macduff wants, and what Malcolm has already been organising, is that King Edward will give permission for one of his lords, who we are told is called the warlike Seward, will provide them with an army so that they can march on Scotland and take the throne from Macbeth. So what Shakespeare's doing at the end of Act 3, which remember is the act of chaos, Act 4 is where we start to see some of the solutions applied. And one of the solutions is the fact that Malcolm has been able to raise an army led by an English lord, Seward, and then get that army together and try to take the throne from Macbeth. One of the reasons that they want the Lord of Northumberland to help them is not only is he supposed to be a brilliant soldier, but also, if you know anything about the geography of the British Isles, you'll know that Northumberland is a county in England which borders Scotland. So that would be the perfect place to launch an attack on Scotland. So just to summarise, because there's a lot to take in here, I appreciate that. To summarise, when Lennox is asking the Lord where Macduff has gone, he finds out that Macduff has gone to join Malcolm, who is being looked after by King Edward the Confessor, in order to ask the king to raise an army to march on Scotland so that Macbeth can be defeated and Malcolm can take his rightful place on the throne. Let me just put that into the context of what the Lord says next, so then we get a little bit more continuity. So the Lord says, Thither Macduff is gone to pray the Holy King upon his aid to wake Northumberland and warlike Seward, that by the help of these, with him above, to ratify the work, we may again give to our tables meat, sleep to our nights. Notice how God is referenced in this speech. This idea, you've got him above, this idea of because King Edward is holy, because Malcolm is good, they are hoping that God will bless the English army so that Malcolm's desire to get rid of Macbeth and defeat him and take the kingship back will be blessed with success. Now, it's this bit where we start to hear from the Lord some of the terrible things which are happening under Macbeth's reign by implication. So, when Malcolm and the English army, and Macduff of course, march on Scotland. They are hoping and praying that God will bless the army so that Macbeth can be defeated, so that we may again give to our tables meat. So this tells us that under Macbeth's reign, people in Scotland are starving. We will also have, the Lord hopes, sleep to our nights again. So this gives us the impression that people in Scotland are so frightened under Macbeth's reign that they're finding it difficult to sleep at night. It also puts into my head the image of, if you think about totalitarian regimes like Stalin's Russia or Hitler's Nazi Germany, the idea of the secret police turning up in the middle of the night and waking up and carrying off and executing and imprisoning anybody who speaks out against the ruler. You get that, or at least I get that implication when the Lord mentions that people are finding it difficult to sleep at night, because it puts in my mind the image of Macbeth's agents going in the middle of the night and dragging out anybody who's spoken against Macbeth or not done what he's instructed, and they end up executed or imprisoned. The Lord goes on that he hopes that Malcolm's army will be successful enough to free from our feasts and our banquets bloody knives. Now, if you hold a feast or a banquet, you invite guests. And what this line suggests is that although people are still having feasts and banquets, although they're still inviting their friends round to share a meal, there are bloody knives at those meals. In other words, people who are loyal to Macbeth, who are spying on those at the feast, and will execute anybody who says anything derogatory or unflattering about Macbeth. It's a line that demonstrates that people in Scotland are finding it difficult to trust their neighbours because they just don't know whether or not those neighbours might be spies for Macbeth. He carries on. Do faithful homage and receive free honours, all which we pine for now. So all of the good things of life, all of the freedoms that we pine for, that we're desperate for now, we hope those good times will return. The Lord ends his speech by saying this, And this report hath so exasperate the king that he prepares for some attempt of war. It's an important plot revelation. Macbeth knows that Macduff has fled to England and that news has reached Macbeth about what Malcolm and Macduff are planning to raise this army to march on Scotland. And we're told that this news has exasperated Macbeth. It's angered and frustrated him. So much so, we are told, that he prepares for some attempt of war. So Macbeth is getting ready to fight. Macbeth has got wind of the fact that Malcolm and Macduff are trying to raise an army against him. It's exasperated him, it's angered him, and so he's getting his own army ready to meet Malcolm's army if and when it arrives. Lennox asks the question, sent he to Macduff? In other words, did Macbeth summon Macduff to return to Scotland? And the Lord replies, he did. And with an absolute "Sir, not I," the cloudy messenger turns me his back and hums, as who should say, you'll rue the time that clogs me with this answer. Put simply, Macbeth did summon Macduff. When he found out that Macduff had fled, he sent messengers after him to summon him back, and Macduff sent a messenger back in return to say, no, I'm not coming back. So Macduff, very courageous, it's a very risky and dangerous thing to do, but he's demonstrating his defiance. There is no way that Macduff is going to take instructions from Macbeth. He is in defiance of Macbeth's instructions. And so the scene concludes with Lennox saying, and that well might advise him to a caution to hold what distance his wisdom can provide. Some holy angel fly to the court of England, and unfold his message ere he come, that a swift blessing may soon return to this our suffering country under a hand accursed. And the Lord says, I'll send my prayers with him. So Lennox and the Lord are hoping, praying, that Malcolm will be successful, that Macduff will be successful, that God will bless their ventures, will send a holy angel to make sure that this plan of Malcolm's comes to fruition. And notice as well that Lennox describes Scotland as a suffering country, under a hand accursed, a cursed hand. And by describing Macbeth's reign as accursed, it shows us a further and deeper contrast that the man that Macbeth is now is a far cry from the man who was so respected at the beginning of the play. Remember, up to this point, Lennox has shown loyalty to Macbeth, but now he describes Macbeth as accursed. So at the end of Act 3, we come to the end of the chaos phase. That's not to say that there is no chaos and violence in Act 4. There is. But by the time we get to the end of Act 4, we can see the solution to the problem of Macbeth becoming more and more likely. It's Shakespeare signalling the fact that by the end of Act 4, Macbeth will be toppled in the resolution in Act 5. So Act 4 is next on the agenda, and Act 4 Scene 1 is a very important scene in which Macbeth visits the witches and gains further advice from them. So join me for that tutorial in the near future.